Okay, I am standing here on the Emmitsburg Road where it meets Ridge Road, and I am at the current day office of the Battlefield Resort of Gettysburg, which is located at 1916 Emmitsburg Road. And we're going to look at this house that stands here on the corner. And we're going to look at the stone portion of the house. It's a Civil War building that was owned by Emmanuel George Trostle. Now, Emmanuel George Trostle was born on December the 1st, 1839, here in Adams County, Pennsylvania. He was the son of Henry and Jane Trostle, and Jane's maiden name was Pitzer. His father was a miller and a blacksmith, but he followed the farming trade near the end of his life. Now, Emmanuel Trostle was actually raised in the farming trade, and he was a farmer until the age of 17. Now, the Trossels owned a couple properties in town. This one was one of them. The other one was actually the farm near the Bryan farm at Pickett's Charge that was, it's no longer there. It was rented out to a David Ziegler, and it's today where Ziegler's Grove is. Emmanuel was raised on a farm. He was a farmer to the age of 17, and then he was hired out on a farm for 2 years, and then he learned the shoemaker trade. During the Battle of Gettysburg, he was actually a shoemaker. And as I walk around the Emmitsburg roadside, the house has been added on with modern additions, as you can see, but the original stone part at the top was Emmanuel Trossell's house. In October of 1859, at the age of 20, he married Mary Plank, who was the daughter of John and Hester Plank. Hester's maiden name was Mickley. And they together had 3 children in their union: Harry M. Trostle, Ida M. Trostle, and Minnie Trostle. They also adopted Oscar Mundorf Jr. Now, they were members of the German Reformed Church of Gettysburg, which was located on Stratton Street. Now, Emmanuel Trostle was also a township judge. He was assessor and a tax collector. On July the 2nd, 1863, while in the stone house here, a rebel colonel rode up the Emmitsburg Road and advised Mr. Trostle and his family, explained to them that they were possibly in great danger, and explained that they should pass through their lines to safety. Now, Trostle said that he would never make it back toward their picket, so the colonel actually took Trostle and his family through Confederate lines, through their pickets, and to safety. Unfortunately, the next morning, that is the morning of July 3rd, 1863, as Mr. Trostle was worried about his household goods, he started for his house, and he was arrested by the pickets. He was then taken onto the battlefield for parole. But just before the parole could be written, the Battle of Gettysburg, the action known as Pickett's Charge, happened around 1 o'clock. And he was then marched off as a prisoner of war back past his farm, down 15. And he was marched 175 miles over the course of 6 days, 3 days without anything to eat. He was taken to Stanton, Virginia. He was imprisoned for over 22 months in Libby Prison, Castle Thunder, Hell's Delight, and finally in Salisbury, North Carolina. His wife would always have believed him to be dead, that he was killed, but after his release, he was sent back here to Gettysburg. This has been the Emmanuel George Trostle House Part 1 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is the Emmanuel George Trostle House Part 2 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. During that time, which he was captured at Gettysburg, he was actually a shoemaker until the year 1866, after he returned. In 1868, he went to Lee County, Illinois, and there he remained 6 months. He then returned to Pennsylvania, locating back at Gettysburg, where he farmed and followed his trade for 2 years. He then abandoned the trade and then he devoted his time exclusively to agriculture. In 1880, he bought 52 acres of land where he resided. In October of 1859, as I said, he married Mary Plank, and Emmanuel Trostle would live into the 1900s. We'll talk about that on a later video. Now, again, the Emmetsburg Road is an area of hotbed activity, and many people believe that the final action at Gettysburg was Pickett's charge. Even those who debate Pickett's charge being the final action, those people would say or would think that maybe the action of East Cavalry Field, which happened about a half an hour after Pickett's charge ended, actually ended the battle. But the Battle of Gettysburg ended on the southern end of the battlefield as men from Merritt's Federal Cavalry Brigade clashed with some Confederate cavalry right here in this area between the Cornelius Dolan farm and the Alexander Kearns farm, which is down the Emmetsburg Pike that way. This home actually sat in the very middle of the final action at Gettysburg, which is known as South Cavalry Battlefield. You can go back and watch my video on South Cavalry Battlefield, or the series I've done on the Cornelius Dolan farm for a little bit more information. We're going to talk about Cornelius and his connection to this farm on our next part. This has been the Emmanuel George Trostle Farm Part 2 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is going to be the Emmanuel George Trostle Farm Part 3 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Now, it isn't really known exactly when the stone portion of the house was built, though it does show up on the 1858 Adams County map. So most likely this house was built somewhere between the year 1840 and 1858. Now we're going to talk about an incident. We already learned that Emmanuel Trostle was taken as a prisoner during the Battle of Gettysburg, and he was one of several civilians that were actually imprisoned and marched off with Lee's army. But this house has a connection to another local man, and we're going to talk about that now. On the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, a neighbor of Trostle who lived just up the road here in this direction beyond this roof over here was a man named Cornelius Dolan. Dolan lived there with his wife and 2 daughters. And on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, as the Battle of Gettysburg resumed, up here at the Alexander Kearns farm around the bend, Hood's division actually would charge into the area of Devil's Den and Little Round Top. And as the battle began, Cornelius at his farm, deciding that he was intrigued by what was going on over the last 24 hours, decided he was going to go into his barn and grab his rifle and see what was going on. He grabbed his rifle and he began marching out to the end of his property line to Wintrode Ridge there. And as he got to Wintrode Ridge, he then began marching in the direction toward our camera. As he got to the house here, he was actually captured by the same Confederate soldiers that captured Emmanuel Trostle earlier in the day. And Cornelius had a bigger problem than Trostle. Cornelius was captured carrying a rifle. And one thing you don't do during the Battle of Gettysburg, or any battle for that matter, is be in arms if you're not in a military uniform. He was in a military uniform, or not in a military uniform, carrying a rifle as a civilian. And that wasn't good. He was brought inside of this house and interviewed by a Confederate major, and that Confederate major basically told him that he was going to receive the death penalty. And it just so happened that Cornelius Dolan was a master mason, and the major that was interviewing Cornelius Dolan was also a master mason. And after a brief time of discussion, it was said that Cornelius would be set free, and he was told to leave, head back to his farm, and stay in the basement until the fighting had ceased. Cornelius Dolan, who was brought here to Emmanuel Trostle's farm, was the only civilian captured during the Battle of Gettysburg that was actually released. This has been the Emmanuel Trostle Farm Part 3 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Hey, this is going to be the Emmanuel George Trostle House Part 4 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And in this part, we are going to take you inside the Emmanuel Trostle House. Now, of course, the offices here are closed to the house. But, as usual, because this is Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook, I have procured the key. And we are going to take everyone in for an exclusive look at the Emmanuel Trostle House. So let's get in here. All right. And of course, this was Emmanuel Trostle's house, and today it is the business offices for the Battlefield Resort. It is here, this portion of the house, rather, is actually the original portion. This is the addition, and over here is the addition. But this doorway is part of the original house. In fact, right here is the exterior stone wall. And the house was not a very large house. In fact, this room that we're walking in is the size of the house. And this is, as I turn the lights on here, this is the downstairs with the original fireplace. It actually has an insert in it now. Of course, the chimney that you see on the roof comes from here. So this is the original fireplace for Emmanuel Trostle's. And actually there is a Union artillery uniform here. There was Union artillery involved in the final action at Gettysburg. Somewhere in this room was where Cornelius Dolan was taken on July 2nd, 1863, and interviewed and almost sentenced to death in this very room that we're walking in today. And of course, today it's used as the office as a resort, and they sell different packages. So if you guys, like to travel or like to do camping, please stop in here at this historic house. Tell them that Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook sent you, and put together a package to go somewhere where the Travel Resorts of America own. And they do stuff all over the country, East Coast, West Coast, etc. But enough about that. Emmanuel Trostle's house, Cornelius Dolan is almost sentenced to death here. And at one time, there was a stairwell. I believe the stairwell was right over here that actually led up to the second floor. But since it's remodeling, the stairwell has been taken out. So we're actually going to walk into the modern portion of the house and then go upstairs. Alrighty, now we're going to the second floor, and actually as we're here on the second floor, you can see the stone wall that once was the outline or the eastern wall of the house right here. So this area where there's two offices would have been the upstairs of the Emmanuel Trostle house. And as we look out the north window, we can imagine here that it was here on July 2nd, 1863, that those Confederate soldiers came and to this house to let Trostle and his family know that they were in danger and they needed to go through the Confederate lines. As we look at the southern window of the house on this office, it is down this window that on July 2nd in the late afternoon that Cornelius Dolan came toward our camera now and was captured somewhere in this area and then brought inside of this house to the downstairs floor. And Cornelius was almost hung, because he was captured in arms. There were several large trees. You can see this tree here. But there were several large trees behind, and there was a wooded area behind the house, and that may have been the area that they may have attempted to hang Cornelius. Anything that's left of the basement actually was down in this area, and you can actually see again the original walls of the house. But this is the Emmanuel George Trostle house, part 4, inside the Trostle house, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is going to be the Emmanuel George Trostle house, part 5, our final part, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And we're going to talk about the death of Emmanuel George Trostle on September the 17th, 1914. This is being read from a newspaper. And it says, Emmanuel Trostle falls dead. Falling over at the side of his bed, Emmanuel G. Trostle, a well-known resident of Cashtown, died at 4 o'clock on Tuesday morning, aged 75 years, 9 months, and 14 days. Mr. Trostle had been a sufferer from heart trouble for some time and frequently had to get out of bed at night on account of shortness of breath. It is believed that an attack of this discomfort caused him to get out on Tuesday morning, and when he fell, his wife awakened. He was dead when she reached his side. Mr. Trostle was a veteran of the Civil War and had many interesting experiences during his service. On June the 30th, 1863, he was questioned, and then he was taken prisoner during the Battle of Gettysburg along the Emmitsburg Road. He was sent to Libby Prison, where he served as a nurse. Later, he was released and served some time at Castle Thunder Prison. His entire time in the 2 places occupying the period was for 22 months. Upon his return home from the war, he resided in Highland Township, where he fell. He owed his occupation of farming and shoemaking. He leaves his wife and 1 son, Harry Trostle of Highland Township, and 2 daughters, Miss I.D. Mickley of Cashtown and Miss William Carball of Highland Township. So this has been the Emmanuel George Trostle residence, house, and farm here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. This has been our 5th and final part, and I hope you enjoyed the series.